Hey guys, welcome back to another lecture on the American Civil War. Today we are going to be taking a look at the theaters of war, specifically where many of the major battles were taking place, but is the fighting actually occurring. We will also look at the initial phases of the war in 1861. We'll see the initial strategies that the North will attempt to use in blockading the South and instituting what becomes known as their Anaconda Plan. We will also take a look at the first real major battle that takes place. And, a lot of people thought it was just going to be one big battle and it'd be over with, but it proved pretty early that there was not going to be just a singular battle, especially given the results of it. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to begin by sharing out a great website I found the other day. And I think this, if I can get this to pop up, yeah, perfect. So what we have here is a map where they have put in all of the battles of the Civil War. And I just want to quickly kind of take you through this. I've started it at the very beginning. There, over on the left-hand side, there will be a list of the dates and names of each of the battles. On the main screen, you're going to see a map and where those battles are taking place. I'll kind of pause it at a few different points and talk about what trends we are seeing here, but keep noticing that slider, and as we're advancing, where the fighting is actually occurring, and that'll help me explain the theaters of war. So we're going to get started right here. You can see that red dot, that red star. The red star will signify major battles that are taking place. So obviously we have Fort Sumter. That is the first one, April 12th, 1861. I'm going to go ahead and click and start moving that slide, and we'll see pretty soon some of the other battles start popping up. Now already you can see that there's major concentration. By the time we get to 1862, there's a major concentration out east of battles. Most of the Eastern Theater, as we are going to call it, is focused on gaining the capital of the opponent. So at one point, the Confederates are within 30 miles of Washington, D.C. You can see that there's going to be fighting down in Southern Virginia, making their way towards Richmond. So you'll also see that as we're getting into 1862, there's some major battles happening in and around Tennessee, Nashville area. What we're going to see from the Union is that one of their major strategies, and of course you can see the coastline starting to pop up with that blockade putting into place. Many of the battles are taking place in Tennessee, and there are some major riverways. You'll notice that as we've gotten here to mid-1862, you'll notice in Tennessee that many of these battles are centered right around where some of these major rivers, the Ohio River is meeting up with the Mississippi River. That crossroads is very important, not only to continue to cut off the South from accessing rivers themselves, but also cut them off from the western part of the Confederacy. A lot of food was being imported from Texas, places like that, and if you can cut off the Mississippi, you've sliced the Confederacy in half. So that's going to be a major goal. I'm going to continue on here. So we're in late 1862, a number of battles. You'll see that we're making our way into the north. It's going to be we're seeing some battles in Maryland, as far north, eventually as Pennsylvania. You'll also see that some battles have started to spread down the Mississippi River. Vicksburg is going to be a major battle during this period that we'll look at. As we finish up 1863, Gettysburg has taken place. So in the northern part, as far north as the Confederate Army would get in Pennsylvania, and as you're going to start seeing here an impact, especially in eastern Tennessee and making their way into Georgia towards the end of the war, 1864. Yeah, look, it's making its way towards Atlanta. We got Sherman down there, just utilizing total war, and soon we're going to start seeing his march to the sea. So fast forwarding all the way to the very end of the conflict, at the end of 1865, this is what the map will look like. We have three major areas of concentrations. We have the Eastern Theater, we have the Western Theater, which will incorporate there the fighting in Kentucky and Tennessee, Mississippi, and then also we have the Trans-Mississippi Theater, which includes fighting both around Missouri, Arkansas, and there's even a battle out here out west in New Mexico. So some of the fighting did spread that far westward, and Yeah, so we're going to be talking about all three of these theaters. Let me go ahead and share slides. Here we go. Sorry, I tried to have it all ready to go. Okay, I'm going to back up here just a little bit. All right, so let's take a look at another map that kind of highlights this. I like this because it breaks it down by county and becomes a little bit easier to see where the major engagements are taking place and when. Darker the colors referring to later in the conflict. Here we have another type of map which use shading to show the various phases of this war, and you can see eventually that swath that's cut across Georgia, as we highlighted there, that takes place in the latter part of the war. With Sherman's march to the sea. I include this here because I think it's a good point to talk about it. Sometimes I incorrectly use these terms interchangeably, and they absolutely mean different things. So we need to make sure that we are as accurate as possible in this. So I actually want to start down at the very bottom. So when we say an army, oftentimes we refer to the United States Army, right? And we're talking about the entire army of itself. In this war, yes, that United States Army exists, but they are broken down into individual armies. Okay, so when we say individual armies, Lee is going to have an army out east. Grant is going to have an army out west. Eventually, those we'll see Grant shift over to the east. But when I say the army of the Mississippi, this is what I'm referring to, that 80,000 plus. You go up a level, you have the corps with the major general leading those division. Each division had about 8,000 soldiers. Break it down even further, about 2 to 5 regiments, 2 to 4 brigades in a division. Mark it down even further, you're looking at regiments of about 800, and that would be made up even smaller units if you kept going. But for the most part, I'll use these terms from time to time. If this was a more intense study, we would look at specific divisions and brigades where they're going. But for the most part, we're going to be talking about the armies themselves. So if you had a family member that perhaps fought in the Civil War, the regiment is a great place to start doing research. I'll never forget coming across one of my ancestors that fought in the Civil War, and we found out which regiment they were. And in fact, there even actually was there was a group that went out and acted out that regiment. It was the 26th North Carolina. So anyways, getting off topic here, we can go ahead and begin with our notes. So the first stage that I want to discuss is, of course, those theaters of war, and kind of define them even further here. Before I begin that, I do want to make a note here, and I would star this because it's going to come up time and again. The naming of both the battles and the armies is going to differ according to which side you are speaking on. So, oftentimes the Union armies are going to be named after major rivers. Okay, and then the Confederate armies are often named after states. So, a good way to remember that is, of course, this talk about states' rights. We talked about states' rights being a part of the motivation early on. So if you can remember that the Confederacy is all about the states, they named their armies after states. Also with the battles, they're going to be different. We'll talk about that a little bit later on when we start getting into the battles. I'll give you an example with First Bull Run. Let's take a look at the Eastern Theater and who is fighting initially and who will eventually take over this theater. The main fighting in the Civil War takes place in this theater. It has the bulk of the armies: Virginia, West Virginia, which has split off, Maryland, Pennsylvania, around Washington, D.C. These are mainly focused on capturing the opponent's capitals. So that's what the Eastern Theater early goals are, to capture the opponent's capitals. For the Union side, we have the Army of the Potomac. So again, rivers here. The Army of the Potomac. It is going to be headed up by McClellan. We've already seen McClellan in our notes. As we saw, and I think I had you guys do an activity about it, McClellan was very slow to pull the trigger on, taking advantage of his successes. At many times, they could have taken Richmond, and McClellan refused to do it, flat out disobeyed Lincoln's orders to move on the Confederate Army. So we'll see McClellan actually be replaced pretty early on in this war. He will be replaced by General Pope in 1862 after the Union Army fails to take Richmond. As for the Confederate Army located in the Eastern Theater, we have the Army of Northern Virginia, again named after states there. Originally, it's led by General Joseph Johnston, but Johnston will become injured in one of the early battles, and it'll force him out of service. So leadership of the Army of Northern Virginia will fall to decorated General Robert E. Lee. And when we see him take over, we're going to see not just textbook victories, but we're going to see very non-textbook victories that become textbook victories. His movement in various battles is just insane. How often he's taking on an army twice his size and winning. So we'll see Robert E. Lee emerge as kind of the hero of this war. Also, remember, he understands the pressure that the South is under to get this war completed by a certain time period. Let's take a look at the Western Theater. Before we do that, a couple maps here. I think these are good, showing the various years and kind of the themes that we're seeing here. Very early on, 1861, you can see it's just bouncing back and forth around D.C., kind of setting up the boundary lines at this point. 1862 is when things really take off. The Union makes an advance towards Richmond. You can see them coming up the peninsula there. And then 1863 is, of course, when the Confederates get the upper hand and they do invade the North, taking the fighting to the Northern people, making it as far north as Pennsylvania with Gettysburg. So, ultimately the war is, if anything, it looked as if the Confederates, if they had a chance in the Eastern Theater, eventually that was lost by 1864 and 1865. But out west, it's a completely different story. The Union is, under the leadership of General Grant, is having success after success. The main fighting, of course, as you can see there in the states, Alabama, Georgia, even some in Florida, I think, Mississippi, North Carolina, Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, where most of this fighting is occurring. Now, keep in mind, in this primarily Southern theater, the population centers are not nearly as strong or as large as what we see in the Eastern theater. Therefore, the fighting is going to be more concentrated on geographic areas of strategical importance, namely the rivers. So what we're going to see is that, as I alluded to earlier, there's going to be some major fighting along the Mississippi River to try and gain control of that at key points. One of the longest sieges of the war at Vicksburg takes place along the Mississippi. So we will see plenty of that. Let's talk about the two armies that we will be clashing in the Western Theater. For the Union side, they had the Army of the Tennessee. That is the Tennessee River that it is named after. So note the possible confusion there. They are headed up by Ulysses S. Grant, who is very successful with the Army of the Tennessee. He does successfully penetrate into the South and to Tennessee, and taking eventually the Cumberland rivers as well. Grant would be rewarded by taking on the overall command of the Union armies in the East later on, and we'll see that's when things start to change. For the Confederacy out west, we have the Army of Mississippi, okay? Once again, named after states here. First, it's led by Beauregard, General P.G.T. Beauregard. We've already seen him at Fort Sumter, the main Confederate general there. It was later commanded, this Army of Mississippi, by Braxton Bragg, B-R-A-G-G, and he will be removed from office after the disastrous Battle of Chattanooga. And you can see Chattanooga in the southeastern portion of Tennessee there, 1863. So the final theater of war that we have left to discuss, and again, one of these maps, I think these are good visuals showing the movement. Feel free to pause it if you'd like to take another view. Again, a breakdown by year. You can really see really Grant's strategy of moving, especially looking 1863, 1864, moving into Tennessee, some major victories along the riverways there into Georgia. The final theater of war is the Trans-Mississippi Theater. This is fighting that took place west of the Mississippi. And the The fighting mainly takes place in Missouri and Arkansas. There is some fighting in Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana, but the main fighting, the heaviest fighting, is in Missouri and later Arkansas. Missouri is in a very interesting spot because it is a pro-Southern state, but with border state appeal among the people. So it's often said that the people of Missouri kind of often would side with the pro-Union. Remember, there's big chunks of immigrant settlements, including places like Hermann, Missouri. But for the most part, the government was very pro-Southern, very pro-Southern. So we are going to see Missouri uh, unofficially secede, and the Confederacy does like to include them. But again, the Union has a pretty good rap on Missouri, although the Confederacy will try to gain footholds throughout the war. Let's talk about a couple names that I'll mention later on, especially with the government. The governor, Claiborne Fox Jackson of Missouri, he will elevate General Sterling Price, who will take on the leadership of the Missouri State Guard, and they're going to be the ones trying to push the Union out of Missouri. The Union Army in this theater is called the Army of the West or the Army of the Border. We will see both of those names. Initially, it's led by General Nathaniel Lyon, who would become the first Union general killed in the Civil War. Later on, General Curtis will take over and control Union forces. Excuse me. Confederate forces, named again after the states here, Army of Missouri. And sometimes we'll see them also called the Army of the West. So that's completely confusing. I will try to avoid using the Army of the West without mentioning whether I'm referring to Union or Confederate. But either way, first, as I said, Sterling Price would be commanding that group made up of the old Missouri State Guard, which was a militia that had been formed in the first days of the Civil War to protest against Union invasion. And we will see the Union come swiftly, especially to places like St. Louis and later Jefferson City. So let's move into the main strategy that is used. There's another I think I've shown that map. Let's talk about the main strategy that the Union is going to attempt here for strangling the South, and that is called the Anaconda Plan. The Anaconda Plan was developed by Winfield Scott. We mentioned him during the Mexican-American War. He emerged as one of the heroes of that war. Later on, will even run for president. The plan called for a blockade of southern ports and an advancement up and down the Mississippi and Tennessee rivers in an attempt to divide the South. The results, I will say overall, we'll get into some more specifics here, but the results overall was the success is still debated. How powerful the blockade or how successful it actually was. Also, whether the division actually caused too much pressure on the South. It's still very much debated to this day. But as we said, first part of that plan there was blockade. The difficulty of blockading the South is that you have literally you have hundreds of miles of coastline that frankly you don't have a very strong navy in the first place. So you're spreading those groups out pretty thin. The South would use what they called blockade runners, and these were basically fast boats that would try to outrun the Union blockade ships. And there is evidence that more than 75% of those blockade runners were successful. So I think that's a major piece of evidence when asked, was the Anaconda Plan, or more specifically, was the blockade successful? 75% of the ships that were challenging that blockade made it through. So I don't know who all would count that as a success. Also, keep in mind that early on, I mean, it's not that the South is dealing with inadequacy in material early on. It's about really trying their ability to make money to keep waging this war, because they are going to be trying to sell cotton, and they have to be able to get that to markets over in Europe. Well, if they can't get it there, then obviously they're going to lose out on that financial battle. Let's move on to river control. General Scott thought that by controlling the rivers, it would be a bloodless way to bring the South into submission. The North moved rather smoothly until the high casualty rates and really long, drawn-out conflict at Vicksburg. Historians also point to the chaotic implementation of the plan, that individual commanders in the field were often changing the focus or changing their targets, and often changing the overall plan itself. So again, there's multiple purposes to the blockade, to the Anaconda Plan, trying to choke out the South economically, trying to control key riverways, and it was met with mixed success. All right, well, let's get down to it. Let's get to the first major battle of the war. This takes place on July 21st, 1861. The there was this real thought that perhaps if there was one big battle that could be had, that it would decide everything, right? You throw the bulk of your forces at the enemy. If they get crushed, which both sides thought they could crush the other side, then that would be it. It would decide everything. Well, I mean, that might sound good. That's not how war usually works out. Usually war draws on a lot longer than most people think. So, that's going to be the case here. The end, as you can see there, letter D, it is a Confederate victory. I mean, if this was going to be it, boy, I mean, that was a short war, but what do you do when the South actually won? So obviously the Union's not done fighting after this. So let's get into some of the details here. Before I begin this, you'll notice in the title it says Battle of First Bull Run, parentheses, Manassas. So the naming issue again. So the North tended to name their battles near natural resources or geographic landmarks. So those are rivers, those are mountains, things like that. So Bull Run was the name of a creek that ran close by here. The Southerners tend to highlight important cities or important kind of centers of trade. In this case, there was a major railroad hub in the city of Manassas. So they call it the First Battle of Manassas in the South, and the Northerners call it the First Battle of Bull Run. How did it get to this point? Well, the Union generals were really feeling pressure to act, as I already said. Lincoln had ordered movement to take the war to them. So McDowell, one of the main Union generals here, McDowell was really facing pressure to capture Richmond as quickly as possible. Many of those initial volunteers, remember that 75,000 that Lincoln called up, they are towards the end of their volunteer time, okay? Many of them signed up for 3 months. We're getting towards the end of that. So you got to act because you're about to lose the bulk of your army. So even though the Union soldiers are undisciplined, they're inexperienced, they are still sent to attack the Confederate forces about 30 miles outside Washington, D.C. Man with the only war experience in this war, General Beauregard, is going to be sent to Manassas to dig in and to hold that railroad junction. And he will deploy all along Bull Run Creek with the goals of blockading any federal approach to Richmond and holding the railroad junction at all costs. The letter C there, first and last, I was alluding to this to introduce the battle, but many people thought this would be it. In fact, one almost humorous story that I've heard was, there were actually people that came out to watch this battle take place from nearby hillsides. I mean, they basically made a picnic out of it, not knowing, number one, that this would be, or perhaps they did know, I don't know, but this would be a tremendous loss of life that they were saying, but this was no picnic. I mean, this was a major battle that had major implications. And people at this point, people always romanticize war. War is always romanticized. You've heard me say that before. It's always easy to engage in war. What's tough is staying out of war. People are excited about this. There's this romanticized view that the Union's going to crush the Confederacy immediately and that'll all be done with. Well, you want to see that crushing, don't you? I mean, if you're pro-Union, if you're waving the American flag, you want to go out and see this. So a lot of people were sitting hillside watching this battle unfold, but obviously, although it was the first, many of those journalists and politicians and even just normal people like you and me were out there, and This was not what they thought it was going to be. So, good reminder here. War is often celebrated in its initial stages. I remember, early on. I mean, even more recent wars with the war in Iraq. I don't think anybody will ever forget, Bush giving a speech on that aircraft carrier with the sign "Mission Accomplished" behind him. Well, of course, even though we had been able to take major cities, that didn't mean we could hold them as easily. So, we have to be careful about judging too quickly or rushing to decisions, because war is messy. War often takes a lot longer than you expect. So, underestimating warfare, I think, is one of human beings. I think we often do that, and it's a sad thing, because we often have more war because of that. So let's talk about exactly what happened, the results here. Well, initially the Confederate forces, they did have to retreat just a little bit, but they received reinforcements. You can see that on the left hand side, those reinforcements sweeping down from the north, and they completely routed the Union troops. They're going to force them to flee back to Washington, D.C. And at the end of the fighting, you have 500 Union dead. You have 1,200 wounded, 1,300 missing. That's an interesting fact. We're going to see, of course, especially later on in the war, we're going to see a lot of men going AWOL. So, some of those missing, frankly, I mean, many were died and buried on the battlefield, but many of them said, "This isn't my fight. I'm going home." So, 1,300 missing, I think, is very telling regard. I mean, especially if you signed up as a volunteer, you're at the end, you got a couple weeks left of your service. A lot of people hightailed it out of there. So that's something that the Union's going to face very early on, and the South is actually going to face later on as the tide of war begins to shift in favor of the North. For the Confederate results, you have 400 dead and 1,600 wounded. So again, a tremendous loss of life on both sides, but ultimately the Confederacy gained the upper ground here, and ultimately they would win the day. Now, remember, we're thinking long term here. For every wounded and killed Union soldier, that frankly is replaceable compared to every wounded and killed Confederate soldier. So, when the numbers start adding up, the South realizes that they're going to have more trouble filling an army than the North, and that will become one of the major issues for them throughout the war. Next time we meet, we are going to lecture on 1862, and we'll talk about what is happening, especially out west with some of the initial campaigns out there. We'll also see the war in the East begin to evolve. We'll see Stonewall Jackson emerge as a hero and really kind of saved the Confederacy with some strategic decisions that are made in the Shenandoah Valley campaign. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the lecture. As always, email me with any questions that you may have, and until next time.